Rizal's romantic interlude in Japan. One of the happiest interludes in the life of Rizal was his sojourn in the land of cherry blossoms for 1 month and a half. He was enchanted by the natural beauty of Japan, the charming manners of the Japanese people, and the picturesque shrines. Early in the morning of Tuesday, February 28, 1888, Rizal arrived in Yokohama. The next day, he proceeded to Tokyo and took a room at the Tokyo Hotel. Shortly after Rizal's arrival in Tokyo, he was visited at his hotel by Juan Perez Caballero. The latter invited him to live at the Spanish legation. Buenos dias, adios, Señor Rizal. See, can I have a minute with you? Sure, have a seat. I am a delegate from this Spanish legation. I would like to invite you to be one of us. Sure, I would love to. Rizal accepted the invitation for 2 reasons. He could economize his living expenses by staying at the legation, and he had nothing to hide from the prying eyes of the Spanish authorities. During his first day in Tokyo, Rizal was embarrassed because he did not know the Japanese language. To avoid further embarrassment, Rizal decided to study the Japanese language. Being a born linguist, he was able to speak it within a few days. One spring afternoon, a few days after he had moved to Spanish legation in Azabao district of Tokyo, Rizal saw a pretty Japanese girl walking past the legation gate. Being a man with an eye for the feminine beauty, he was attached to her regal loveliness and charm. He craved to meet her, but how? A Japanese gardener told him that Kanojo dinamiya wa Seiko Usui, her name is. The following afternoon, Rizal and the Japanese gardener waited at the legation gate and watched for the girl. As she approached, he took off his hat and politely introduced himself. Konnichiwa, I am Rizal. Konnichiwa, I am Seiko Usui. Rizal is a physician from the Manila and a guest of the Japanese legation. Since that first meeting, Rizal and Usi-son, as Rizal called her, met almost daily. Together, they visited the interesting spots of the city. Rizal saw in lovely Usi-san the qualities of his ideal womanhood: beauty, charm, modesty, and intelligence. No wonder he fell deeply in love with her. Usi-san reciprocated his affection, for it was the first time her heart palpitated with joy to see a man of a gallantry, dignity, courtesy, and versatile talents. Usi-san helped Rizal in many ways. More than a sweetheart, he was his guide, entrepreneur, and tutor. And lastly, Usi-san became his interpreter. Usi-san's beauty and affection almost tempted Rizal to settle down in Japan. At the same time, he was offered a good job at the Spanish legation. If he were a man of lesser heroic mold power, he would have lived permanently in Japan, and happily at that with Usi-san. But then the world in general and the Philippines in particular would have lost a Rizal. Rizal's great love for Usi-san is as tested by the Harris diary and the uses of his departure. He wrote his diary. Japan has enchanted me. The beautiful scenery and the flowers, the trees, and the inhabitants. So peaceful, so courteous and so pleasant. O Sisan, Senora, Senora, I have spent a happy golden month. I don't know if I can have another one like that in all my life. Love, money, friendship, appreciation, honors, these have not been wanting to think that I'm living this life for uncertain, the unknown. There I was offered an easy way to live, beloved and esteemed. To you, I dedicated the final chapter of these memoirs of my youth. No woman like you has ever loved me. No woman like you has ever sacrificed for me, like the flower of the chodi that falls from the stem first, and the whole without falling leaves or without withering. With poetry, still despite its faults, thus fee, neither have you lost your purity, nor have delicate petals of your innocence faded. Senora, Senora, you shall never return to know that I have once more thought of you, and that your image lives in my memory. And undoubtedly, I am always thinking of you. Your name lives in the sight of my lips. Your image accompanies and animates all my thoughts. When shall I return to pass another divine afternoon, like that in the temple of Meguro? When shall the sweet hours I spent with you return? When shall I find them sweeter, more tranquil? I love you, my Osisan. On April 13, 1888, Rizal boarded the Belgian, an English steamer at Yokohama, bound for United States. He left Japan with a heavy heart, see cherry blossoms, and his beloved Osisan. Truly, his sojourn in Japan for 45 days was one of the happiest interludes in his life. April 28, 1888. Rizal first saw America. Rizal first saw America. His arrival in this great country was banned by the racial prejudice, for he saw a discriminatory treatment of the Chinese and the Negroes by the white Americans. Arrival in San Francisco. All passengers were not allowed to land. The American health authorities placed the ship under quarantine because of the cholera epidemic from the Far East. The American consul in Japan had given the ship a clean bill of health, and the British governor of Hong Kong certified to the absence of the cholera cases in China. He soon discovered that the placing of the ship quarantined was motivated by the politics. The ship was carrying 643 Chinese coolies. To win the votes of the right in California, the administration impeded the entry of the Chinese coolies. After a week of a quarantine, all of the first-class passengers, including Rizal, were permitted to land, but the Chinese and the Japanese passenger from the second and the third class accommodation were forced to remain on board base for a longer quarantine period. Across the American continent, May 6, 1888, Sunday 4:30 p.m., Rizal left San Francisco for Oakland. May 7 morning. Had a good breakfast at Reno, Nevada. Rizal saw a wide desert without a plant and trees. May 8, Tuesday morning, Rizal stopped from place to place. They are now at the Utah States. The clock is set me hour ahead of time. May 9, Wednesday, Rizal woke up at Colorado. May 10, Thursday, Rizal woke up in Nebraska. The Missouri River is twice as wide as the Pasig River in its widest part. May 11, Friday, Rizal woke up near Chicago. In Chicago, Rizal observed that every Sego store has an Indian figure, and always different. May 12, Saturday. Rizal arrived at the English territory, Canada. In the afternoon, they will see the Niagara Falls. He described that the Niagara Falls is not so beautiful, not so fine, at the falls at Los Baños, like a river of Pagsangan. He criticized the falls and observed deeply. May 13, Sunday. Rizal woke up near at the Albany. Rizal is going to along the banks of Hudson. Rizal in New York. Rizal reached New York on May 13. He stayed 3 days in the city, which he called the Log City. On May 16, 1888, Rizal left New York for Liverpool on the board of city. Impression to America. The good impression. The material progress of the country has shown its great cities use forms, flourishing industries, and lousy factories. The drive and energy of the American people, and the individual beauty of the land, and the high standards of living, the opportunities for better life offered for immigrants. The bad impression. The American was back of a racial equality. There existed racial prejudice which was inconsistent with the principles of democracy and freedom. Rizal wrote to Pons, "They do not have true civil liberty. In some states, the Negro cannot marry a white woman, nor white to Negroes. Hatred against Chinese leads to difficulty for other Asiatics, who, like the Japanese, are mistaken for Chinese by the ignorant, and therefore being disliked too." 1890, 2 years after Rizal visited the United States, Jose Alejandro asked him, "What impression do you have for America?" He said that America, excellence of freedom, but not only for the whites. Trip across Atlantic. The transatlantic voyage of Rizal from New York to Liverpool was a pleasant one. He won friends of different nationalities on board the palatial city of Rome because of his friendly nature and his ability as a linguist. Rizal entertained American and Europe passenger with his marvelous skills with the yo-yo as an offensive weapon. On board and streamers were some Americans, newspapermen on the way to Rizal. On board, Rizal discussed with them the current situation, social and political problems of mankind, and found them to be inadequate in geopolitics. He could not enjoy their companionship because they were intellectually inferior to him. Rizal arrived at Liverpool, England. On May 24, 1888, he stayed 1 day in this part city, spending the nights at a Dolphin Hotel. Life in London. On May 8, a day after docking at the Liverpool, Rizal went to London. He stayed as a guest at the home of Dr. Antonio Regidor, an exile of 1892 and a practicing lawyer in London. By the end of May, he found a modest boarding house for 37 Charcoal Crescent, Primrose. He was a boarder of the Bricket family. Rizal came to know Dr. Reinhold Rost, the librarian of the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs, an authority on and customs. Dr. Rost was impressed by Rizal's learning and character, and gladly he recommended him the authorities of the British Museum. Rizal spent much of his time in the British Museum, poring over the pages of Morgan's successors and other rare historical works of the Philippines. He frequently visited Dr. Regidor and discussed with him problems pertaining to the Philippine affairs. He spent his Sunday in the house of Dr. Rost, when he had many pleasant discussions on linguistics. He also played Tickle, a popular English game, and boxed with Dr. Rost's son. Both good and bad news from home reached Rizal in London. Of the bad news were the injustice committed by the Spanish authorities on the Filipino people and the Rizal family. One good news cheered Rizal, and that was Reverend Vicente Garcia's defense of the Nolime against the attacks of the friars. Annotating Morgan's book. The greatest achievement of Rizal in London was annotating of Morgan's book, Successor de las Islas Mexico in 1609. He spent many days reading room of the British Museum, poring over the pages of this book, and laboriously reading the old histories of the Philippines, such as those written by Father Chirino, Colin, Argonsola, and Father Placencia, and many more. Christmas in London. Rizal returned to London on December 24 and spent Christmas and New Year's Day with the Brickets. He experienced a delightful Christmas Eve, his first on English soil. That night, he wrote a blue minute. It is now Noche Buena, Christmas Eve. It is the holiday I like best celebrate. It reminds me of many good days, not only of my friends, my infancy, but also my history. Whether or not Christ was born exactly on this day, I do not know, but exactly chronology is immaterial to see the joy of this night. A great genius was born, who preached truth and love. He suffered on account of his mission, but because of this suffering, the one had improved. If not saved, how it shocked me to see people misuse his name to commit many enemies or crimes. Rizal's landlady, Mrs. Bickritz, knowing of his interest in magic, gave him as a Christmas gift of a book entitled The Life and Adventures of Valentine's Vox, the ventriloquist. Rizal became leader of the Filipinos in Europe. While busy in his historical studies in London, Rizal learned that the Filipinos in Barcelona used planning to establish a patriot society which would elucidate in the crusade for reforms. This society caused association Solidaridad was liquidated on December 31, 1888. By anonymous vote of all the members, Rizal was chosen to be the honorary president. This was a recognition of his leadership among all Filipino patriots in Europe. Rizal and the True La Solidaridad on February 15, 1989, Garciano Lopez Haina founded the patriotic newspaper called La Solidaridad Barcelona, which he was residing. His first article, which appeared in La Solidaridad, was entitled Las Agricultores Filipinos, the Filipino Farmers, or another name. It was published on March 25, 1889, 6 days after he left London for Paris. Writings in London. While busy in research studies at the British Museum, Rizal received a news on Friday. Rodriguez, unable to attack on his Noli. In defense, he wrote a pamphlet entitled La Vision de Fray Rodriguez, which was established and published in Barcelona under his non-diplome de Mas Alang. In London, Rizal wrote the famous letter to the young woman in Malolos. It was in February 22, 1889, in Tagalog. He penned it upon the request of Marcelo del Pilar to praise the young ladies of Malolos for their courage to establish a school when they could learn Spanish despite the opposition of Father Felipe Garcia, a Spanish parish priest of Malolos. Romance with Gertrude Piquet. Rizal had a romantic interlude with the oldest of the three Piquet sisters, Gertrude, or Getty, as she was affectionately called, was a buxom English girl with brown hair, blue eyes, and rosy cheeks. She fell in love with Rizal. On a cold winter morning, she had a sunny smile for him, chattering gaily like a hummingbird. During the family picnics, she was particularly very happy because Rizal was with them and she gave him all her attention. And on the rainy days, when Rizal stayed at home, she helped him by mixing his colors for painting or assisted in preparing the day for sculpting. Rizal, being a man of normal emotions, found exhilarating joy in Interlude's company. Their friendship drifted towards romance. Rizal suddenly realized Mary Jetty, for he had a mission to fulfill in life. Adios, London. Suddenly, on March 19, 1889, Rizal bade goodbye to the kind Piquet family and left London for Paris. He was sad and crossed the English Channel, for he had cherished so many beautiful memories of London.